Welcome to Decode Your Burnout, the podcast where we crack the code on burnout based on three primary factors: your programming, environment, and personality. We also feature experts who debunk the myths about what it takes to be successful in their industry and spin those tips to fit the workplace so you can optimize the way you work. I'm your host, Dr. Sharon Grossman, a psychologist turned coach, author, and burnout expert. If you're burned out and want to go from exhausted to extraordinary, book a free breakthrough session with me by going to bookachatwithsharon.com. And if you want to see how you're doing and what to focus on next, download the Burnout Checklist. You'll find the link in the show notes or go to bit.ly/checkyourburnout. Now let's get started. Hello, Decode Your Burnout fans, and welcome to another episode with me, Dr. Sharon Grossman. Today, I am joined by Jennie Blumenthal. After spending 20 years in corporate America, helping Fortune 500 companies manage multi-million-dollar growth strategies, Jennie Blumenthal left her partnership in a global consulting firm to launch her own company. In addition to her role as CEO, she also serves as a professional speaker, an adjunct professor in strategy, a board member, and the author of Corporate Rehab, Ditch the Hustle Culture and Thrive Again. Her coaching and speaking business focuses on female executives looking to reach the next level of leadership without losing themselves in the process, and on companies interested in building human-centered cultures. She lives in Washington, D.C. with her husband, 2 kids, and Labrador puppy, and is trying to enjoy this chance to rewrite the next chapter of her career and life by running 10 milers, learning poetry, and playing ice hockey. Jennie, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Dr. Grossman. Happy to be here.
So I'm very excited to learn about your book and everything that's wrapped up in that. But let's first talk about your experience with burnout.
Sure. So mine really started right before the pandemic. I think back in 2019, we didn't necessarily have the language of burnout is so common in headlines, and really practitioners and experts as yourself would have understood it, but most of us really didn't understand what the contributing factors were and really whether we were actually in burnout. And so I was at the pinnacle of my corporate career. I was leading a $300 million practice, managing 200 people, leading these large growth strategies for my clients, which were all over the world. And that really got me having to jump on planes 3 times a week. I've got 2 young kids, as you mentioned. So they were in elementary school at the time. My husband has his own career. And so we were just trying to do it all. And it was really to a point where we were hustling constantly. If it wasn't the 60-hour work week, then it would pivot into the weekend. We were hustling on soccer sidelines or trying to have a full active social life. And really what it took for me was having the pandemic was a moment for me to just get quiet and say, is this really what I want? And am I hustling so hard for a life that I've chosen? Or am I on this ladder to go to the next step? And am I staying in these patterns towards something that isn't really what I had wanted? And so, it started to take its toll on my relationships, with my husband, with my kids, but definitely with myself as well, where I was constantly not in touch with what my body's signals were, whether there was, stress manifesting itself, which is partly maybe where the running came from, because that's a good stress relief. But I was just constantly either getting up at 5:30 in the morning for a yoga class or running, or to hop on a plane. And it was just go, go, go all the time. And so the pandemic was a chance for me to stop and say, I don't think this is what I'm actually put on this earth to do. And I think I'm trying to be happy and I'm not really happy. And so I left and then started to decode my own burnout and figure out what exactly had happened that got me to this place that I didn't even expect to be in. And I thought I was happy and I was achieving. But at the end of the day, I think I was really chasing success instead of fulfillment.
Oh, that is so good. I love that, because I'm sure so many people listening to this right now could totally relate to that. There are so many people who are hustling out there exactly for that reason, because they are chasing success and they equate success with happiness.
Right.
So one of the things we talk about in terms of contributing factors here is a burnout profile or personality. And you absolutely fit with the doer, the person who's in that go, go, go,
Right.
constantly doing stuff. And it sounds like, 60-hour weeks and like all this stuff on the weekends, and then traveling so much and just taking on a ton of responsibility. But there's also what we call our programming. So there's some beliefs that lead people like you to take on as much as you did. And what would you say are some of the underlying beliefs that led you to do as much as you did at that time?
Yes. I could talk for a week on this one. I think that the quick answer is really the performance culture that underlies this hustle culture that we have. So when your worth is really attached to anything that you do in the physical world and not necessarily who you are, I think sometimes that really leads us astray. And for me, I can speak personally to that I think I realized as a young child that when you scored the soccer goal or you got an A, then everybody was excited about that. And that was an easy thing to really, focus on, versus when I was dreaming or creating art or those types of things. That was interesting, but it wasn't a performance. There was nothing to achieve out of it. And so this comes from a very real place. My grandmother grew up in the Depression, survived an awful lot. She passed those traits of hardworking on to us and through my dad. And so there was a lot of focus on, if you just achieve and you actually provide enough, then you can keep your family safe. You can avoid hunger. You can avoid, joblessness. You can make sure that your kids go to great colleges. All of these things that are very real that you need some hustle for. Everybody does. I think the challenge becomes when you get stuck in that gear and your performance is the only way that you see your own value, as opposed to being able to see what are all of the gifts that you have to offer. And if there's no productivity attached to it and there's no achievement attached to it, is it still valuable? And so I think those are really some of my earliest beliefs that were very difficult to try to understand, that there's nothing wrong with performance. It's when it takes on more of your identity or it becomes more of your actual self-worth than you ever intended to, is I think where it gets a little bit challenging. And I think fast forward, this actually gets reflected in a lot of our workplaces. We say we're going to reward the whole person, or we're going to have a balanced scorecard. And then what do we goal people on? Revenue or production. And it's great that you're the person who's doing the DEI work, or that you're the person that everybody wants to work with. You get, a pat on the back for that, but you get your bonus based on what you produce. We're very still focused on this industrial revolution era productivity measure to the way we value things, as opposed to really actually putting our money where our mouth is and saying, we're actually going to goal people on a bit more of a balance of purpose and profit. So I'd really love to see us start to change that and give people a little more space to let go of some of that conditioning, as you mentioned.
So many golden nuggets in there, Jennie. I think you've said it beautifully. Obviously, there is a cultural component to a lot of this, but as you also mentioned, there is some family history and some programming like early on. And so essentially, I think what you've shared is that achievement in your mind equaled safety.
Yes.
And so, and I actually have spoken to a lot of people who have fallen into this trap because of this desire to create safety. And sometimes they're doers. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they're more like the people pleasers, because if everybody likes me, then that's safe. Mm-hmm. Right. And sometimes they're the thinkers, because if I do it perfectly and I'm the good girl, then I'm safe and then I'm loved. Right. So we all have our different versions of it, but I'm so glad that you brought it back to safety, because I think that we're often not even aware that that's what's there running the show. Yes. But it is something that really underlies a lot of our behaviors. because it's this fear of being unsafe in the world, you know?
Right. And I like to bring it back to, our high school classes where we first learned of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where it's
Yes.
this triangle, right? Where at the very bottom is safety and security. And once those needs are met, then you're freed up for your body to actually chase connection with other people and esteem and purpose, right? And that's how we are, that's how we're wired if you ascribe to that methodology. And so when you think about it, so much of being trapped in, the hustle culture, as I'm calling it, is really being trapped at that first layer where your safety needs are not met. So you're not freed up. Your body is just the best supercomputer ever designed. And so it's not freed up to go chase purpose and connection, because every chance you get a chance to go and do that, some signal in your body, and you mentioned it might be unconscious or subconscious that you're not even aware of, tells you it might not be safe to do that. So I'll stick with what I know and what's familiar. And our bodies are just trying to keep us safe and alive. So it's a good thing they're doing their jobs, but sometimes it prevents us, unless we're aware of that programming and shift it, it prevents us from getting these higher order needs met. And so that's, I think, something that is a very real thing that's running a lot of the show, to your point.
Yeah, perfect. So you kind of reset yourself as a result of the pandemic. And we know today you're not hustling in the same sort of way. And in fact, one of the things I think that you're going to share with us is what's on the other side. So for all of the people that are listening that are like, yeah, I know I probably shouldn't work as hard as I do and as long as I do. And like, yeah, I know I'm supposed to feel like I'm worthy regardless and all this kind of stuff. Like we know it on some level, but we don't like really subscribe to that school of thought, right? We don't feel like it's as true. Tell us what is possible.
Sure. So the way I like to think about it is you're shifting yourself from surviving, from that safety layer, into thriving. And that doesn't mean that life will be rainbows and ponies and unicorns and nothing bad will happen. But you'll still have the same stress, you'll still have the same challenges, but you'll be different. If you start to shift some of your mindsets and your patterns and become aware of them, you'll understand how much you're holding yourself back and holding the hustle culture in place. And you'll understand what environments are holding that back. Are there things within society? Are there things within a certain job or family dynamic that are holding that in place and making you hustle for your worth outside of yourself? Or are you doing that, a little bit, or is it both? And I think that to me is really on the other side of this. What I'd love to get to is if people do their own corporate rehab, as the program that I run is called, then you really start to shift some of those mindsets and behaviors and understand, what's going on, bring some of that subconscious into the conscious, and then you're just more aware to make intentional choices. Again, it doesn't mean that everything's going to be perfect. It just means that you'll be aware of what's running the show. Is it growth or is it fear?
Okay. So one of the things we've already said is that a lot of times there's some sort of a belief that isn't necessarily true, but is running the show. What are the three biggest myths that you've seen in terms of what keeps people in that hustle culture?
Yes. So thinking about it first is what kind of we experience in the outer world, because it's the easiest to kind of observe. This myth of you can have it all. And I think, again, I'm sure there are some bad actors out there, but I think for the most part, people are just doing the best with the level of awareness that they have. And so many of us are the first generation of women to really work in a very intentional way outside the home en masse, right? There's generations of women that have always been working outside the home, but I'm talking about critical mass. The numbers are about 57% as we, are approaching in terms of the workforce. And when you think about that, we're raised by a generation of women that said, you can only be a teacher or a nurse or a librarian. And I want you to be something more than that, or do what you want. So we walked into the workplace thinking we could do it all. And I think the challenge is we're still met with the very real constraints of caregiving, of workplace, whether that's discrimination or whether that's just unconscious bias. There's so many things that hold women back, in particular in the workplace. And that's just white women. I'm not even talking about women of color and women that have other status, whether that's disabilities or immigration or what have you. There's so many barriers that when you think about having it all, you're made to think, if I don't have it all, something must be wrong with me. As opposed to, there's actually something structurally wrong with a system that was not designed for everyone to thrive. It was built, again, based on the Industrial Revolution. When we think about most workplaces, it was built for one person working, one person staying at home. It was built for somebody to worry about all of the caregiving responsibilities, and the worker was typically the male and white, and was freed up to really focus on work and then come home and be hands off with kids, right? Now you've got a generation of women that say, I don't want that. You have a generation of men that say, I want to be more than maybe the relationship I had with my dad or my grandfather. And so I think that tension, right, of you can have it all is a myth, because we're trying to actually help people make informed trade-offs and intentional decisions about all the roles that they play. So that's number one. I think.
And let me just pause you before you move on, because I mean, that really hit a nerve for me. The fact that we are working in an outdated system that is built for one parent to be at home. And this is something that comes up for me a lot when my kids have all of these days off from school.
Right.
And you're just like, how the hell is anybody supposed to get any work done when, they've got 2 months off in the summer, and then they've got a week here and another week there. And you're just like, how do people work? Right. And I work for myself. So I have flexibility and I work from home. So it gives me even more flexibility. But I think about a lot of my clients and a lot of the people out there that actually have real jobs, right? They're working for someone, and like, we don't get that much time off as a society from our jobs. Like in America, it's not unusual to have between 2 and 4 weeks a year.
Right.
And your kids are probably off for like 12 weeks a year. So you're thinking like, how does that kind of match up? And the reason it stays like that is because there is that mentality of someone is in the home just having nothing to do all day, and they'll pick it up, but that's not the reality.
Yes. And just to your point, I mean, I could, again, talk about this for forever, but to your point of like, how do people make it work? The women absorb it. That's how it's work. That's how it works, really. Honestly, when you think about it, women who are working in the workplace absorb that with the second shift. They work 20 hours a week more than their partners in terms of caregiving and other things. That doesn't include any of the office invisible work that they're doing. And actually, women's unpaid labor is even worse. They did a study right before the pandemic. If we actually paid minimum wage to women for the work that they contribute to our society that's unpaid, it would be $10 trillion. And you just think about what that could do to GDP and giving people more options. But instead, what do? We just have women absorb that silently. And it's causing epidemics in mental health and depression and burnout. And I think that's why we're seeing the rates that we are today.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So with that aside, we'll go on to myth number 2, which is this scarcity model that there's not enough. And that keeps us hustling to say, I better be first in line. I better get the promotion before someone else does. I better, make sure I sign up my kids for these piano lessons or camp or daycare before someone else gets my spot. And in some cases, those are real constraints, but a lot of times we've experienced that scarcity in some aspect of our lives. And part of our brains and our bodies is still stuck there and thinking, oh, I better keep hustling. I better keep going because I just don't know if there's ever going to be enough. And you see this, to your point, when you've got people that are earning enough for rent or vacations or whatever it is, but they decide instead of spending that time with their family, they're just going to hustle even harder because there's part of them that's stuck in the, if I don't, I'll be vulnerable, then my safety will actually be, threatened. And that's really where scarcity becomes, a feeder for the hustle culture, that if there's not enough and I need to get my piece of it, then that keeps you running on this hamster wheel much longer versus you just actually asking yourself, is there enough? Do I have enough of whatever it might be? Whether it's hours or money or esteem or title, to be able to make some of those more informed decisions. And then, go ahead.
And I was just going to say, I just got interviewed by a journalist for an article on burnout, and it's for people in tech. And what she came to me with was this question of, a lot of people in tech, these programmers who are working in teams, really believe that they can't step away from their work because they're going to be letting their team down.
Right.
And I feel like it's kind of another version of what you're saying, of that scarcity of like, if I'm not there, everything's going to fall apart.
Right.
Right. And they're going to think that I'm not really that committed. And it really is in some way, shape, or form, a scarcity mindset, I feel, because we're really focused on these short-term solutions of like, I'm just going to stick it out. You know, people aren't taking their bathroom breaks and they're not like moving around and they're not taking their vacations. That's for sure. So they're just sitting in a chair all day, making sure that being glued to their screen, that it shows that they're committed. Mm-hmm. But when they're not taking care of themselves and then they burn out, then they're not even able to show up for the job. Right. And I think it does come from that scarcity mindset.
Yes, I totally agree. And sometimes what's hard is you can be doing that yourself, but you could also have a boss or a culture that's really working on that scarcity mindset. All we need to do is look at the headlines for return to work and which bosses said, if you're not, a butt in a seat and here when we open the office, then you're not committed. Well, that completely ignores the reality of people, just like you said, who have daycare or childcare, or frankly, actually said, boy, I'm more productive and innovative when I can work 2 days out of my house. And so what do we do there? It's really being run by this scarcity model, because I'm assuming that person who's made that decision has gotten to the point in his or her career where relying on that scarcity model has gotten them ahead. Hustling has gotten them ahead. And so they're demanding that everybody else do that too. So the hard part is sometimes you're holding it in place. Sometimes the environment, which sometimes can border on toxic, and the culture around you is the one holding it in place. And you have to do some of that work to understand which forces you're working against.
Absolutely.
Well, if we tackle that, then the third and final myth that I see the most is really a lie that we tell ourselves, and that's that we're not enough. And this is something that's typically not said in that way. It's actually the little voice that you hear inside your head when, you miss the school play. Oh, if I had just been a better mom, I would have scheduled this thing. Or you don't get the deal and you say, oh, I knew it. I knew I should have prepared even more, or I should have, priced it at X or what have you. And it's really underlying this root cause of I'm not enough, that my value is not enough, as opposed to really shifting into a place where you say, just by being a human on this world, you're enough. You're absolutely enough. And if you haven't had other people telling you that, that's the voice that you need to start replacing when you have this shame critic inside that's telling you this. One of my best tips is say it out loud. And if it's something that you wouldn't say to a friend, much less an enemy, like don't say that to yourself. Really replace that critic with I'm exactly enough. Maybe I haven't mastered the pitch yet. Maybe I haven't figured out, what exactly I want to do from a purpose perspective in whether that's my career, whether that's something I'm volunteering and doing on the side, whether that's something in my parenting that I want to shift. You just haven't done it yet. It's a growth mindset. It's not a fixed capability mindset. And so I think that's the last piece that is such a lie that holds us back, because even the most successful and confident women who I coach every day in my coaching practice will tell me these things. Well, I don't want to admit it to anybody else, but I just don't think I've done enough, or I don't think I'm moving fast enough. And really what they're telling me is I don't think I'm enough. Yeah. And that's really what you can do to shift that for yourself.
And this brings us back to what you said in the beginning about the performance culture focused on worth. And you said, if there's no productivity attached to it, is it still valuable?
Right.
Which I really loved. It's a really powerful question.
Yeah. And right? I think that's something where, I certainly don't have the answer for every industry, every scale, every, workplace, every family. But I think if we're asking those questions and we give ourselves a chance to say, what would that look like if we balance some of the masculine and feminine power, the ambition, the driving, the doing, with some of the nurturing and compassion? And regardless of your gender, all of us have both of those energies and attributes within us. So what would it look like if we were able to rule our families or the boardroom with a balance of those two and not let one or the other dominate? And what could be is, I think, really an exciting thing for what comes next for us to all actually do some of this rehab for ourselves and watch the people that we lead, including ourselves, grow in the process.
So true. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of your experiences and your understandings and all the work that you're doing now. If somebody is interested in working with you, where should they go?
Sure. Best thing to do is go to my website, which is corporate-rehab.com. You can buy the book that we just released that just hit a #1 bestseller, which is really exciting. And that walks you through the 300 women's stories plus the whole rehab framework. And by the way, you can listen to the stories, whether you're a man or a woman. You just might relate to them a little bit more if you're a woman, but the process itself is the same. We all need some sort of corporate rehab to recognize our patterns, evaluate some of our relationships, heal, arise and play and grow, and then build a new version of our life and our work. So I'm cheering you on and would love to help you out if you go hit the website and pull down some resources.
Love it. So I encourage everybody to go grab a copy of Corporate Rehab. We'll have a link in the show notes. And congratulations on the book. It sounds like it's already a success, which is exciting. I think a lot of people need to read it. And once again, thanks for being on the show. It's been really, really wonderful having you, and you've tapped into some really important key ideas that I think a lot of people will resonate with.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Dr. Grossman. Thanks for all the work you're doing to help decode burnout every day.
Thanks. Now, for all of you thinkers out there, what did you think of the show? If you are a feeler, how did hearing this make you feel? And for all you doers out there, what are you going to do based on what you've heard? Now, regardless of what your personality code is, my goal is to spread the word that burnout is a unique experience. And by decoding it, you can find solutions that are equally unique to you. Help me spread this message by subscribing to the show on Apple or Spotify and leaving us a review telling us what you think, feel, or do differently because of the show. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can leave me a comment or questions to answer in future episodes. And please recommend the show to anyone struggling with burnout. If you are ready to take the next step with me to DYB, go to decodeyourburnout.com, and I'll see you right back here next week.
Thanks so much.